So, welcome to this first episode of my new show. Welcome, whether you're on Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube or wherever you're watching, and whether it's live or whether it's recorded, you are all most very welcome. It'd be interesting to know where you're joining from, so please feel free to drop that in the chat of whatever channel you're on. And I'm being supported behind the scenes by my brilliant team, and they're going to be sharing comments and questions as they become relevant. So every now and again, I'll check in with them and say, anything for me to answer, any comments for me to see. So settle in, grab a brew or your favorite tipple, or in my case, because obviously I have to keep a clear head, a glass of water, and maybe a notebook and pen, because although you can obviously watch this back, it may well be useful for you to make a few notes. Now, you've probably noticed that there's a lot going on in the world right now. So why am I launching my new show today? Well, there are a few reasons, which I will absolutely share with you now. It is, well, here actually in the UK and probably over in the US, it's the eve of International Women's Day. And for others, and I know people are joining from Australia, some of my team are in Australia, it is already International Women's Day. And whether you choose to look at the UN's theme for this International Women's Day 2024, their theme is invest in women, accelerate progress. We certainly need some of that. And of course, there is a marketing house that has kind of taken International Women's Day as their own, and their theme is invite inclusion. Now, actually, I'm here for all of that. I'm here to invite inclusion by investing in women so we accelerate progress. So I'm kind of, I'm not particularly fussed which way we go. What's important, though, is that we recognize that International Women's Day is a moment in time. It kind of marks the importance of the journey towards equality, which frankly is of little use without equity, but more on that in a moment. It also is important to celebrate both progress and achievements. And I think even more so as introverted women and introverts in general, because I think we're more used to hiding our light under a bushel. And quite often we get so caught up with achievements that we forget to mark the progress that we're making. So I said I'd say a little bit more about equity and equality, and here we go. I thought I might remind you of what is probably a well-recognized analogy right now, which is, if you've heard of it, the one about shoes. And I guess it's a great analogy to use because not everyone in the world has the opportunity to own their own shoes. So if we look at shoe ownership through the lens of diversity, equity, inclusion, equality, etc., equality would say that everyone's entitled to and maybe even has shoes. That's equality. Diversity is recognizing that shoes come in many shapes and sizes, so everyone gets a different type of shoe, but they may not be the right kind of shoes. So equity is making sure that everyone gets a pair of shoes that fits and that are fit for purpose. If I'm a bricklayer on a building site, giving me a pair of stilettos just because they fit isn't probably going to be of much use to me. So equity is making sure that what I've got fits and is fit for purpose. And then what about inclusion? Well, inclusion for me is being accepted, wearing whatever damn shoes or boots I choose. whether they are what's acceptable to other people or not. Inclusion is I am accepted and people don't judge me by the shoes I've chosen to wear. And we deserve equity and inclusion as introverts, especially introverted women, so that we are seen and heard authentically. This morning, I hosted an International Women's Day round table, and we talked about glass ceilings and self-imposed limits. And that also reminds me of the story, you may have heard it, about fleas in a jar, that the experiment apparently happened where they put fleas in a jar and the fleas would jump until they hit their heads on the top of the jar. And eventually they stopped jumping just short of the jar lid. So then they took the lid off the jar and the fleas still only jumped to that level they'd learnt. So there is something here about, as women, and I would say especially as introverted women, we may well experience the glass ceiling. But what we need to do every now and again is check that it's not just our perception that the ceiling is there. I'm going to suggest that we bang our heads on it every now and again. And maybe if we bang our heads enough in the right place, it might even crack and break the ceiling, if indeed it even exists. So we need to make sure that the ceiling on what we can achieve is not a kind of self-imposed or conditioned response that might be outdated now, actually, that may not even exist because the world moves on. Now, I probably should get on and talk about the name of the show, because it's pretty unusual, right? Dropping pebbles in a pond. Well, I've always loved the notion of a small pebble being able to make a ripple that travels far and wide. And there's something for me almost mesmeric in that it really has a kind of, it gathers a life of its own and it keeps going, but it's actually very peaceful. And there is an enduring sense about it that there's little that can stop a ripple once it's started. And the other reason why, for me, I've chosen this name is that as introverts, we're not designed to compete with the din of splashy, noisy waters. When I was thinking about that, a kind of water park came to mind, especially the ones with the wave machines. Because what happens to us as introverts, of course, is that we can get lost or drowned out. So we're not really cut out for the splashy, noisy waters. The calmer waters are where we come into our own. We're much better at being the considered, unique, thoughtful voice that's creating intentionally designed and envisioned ripples that travel across those oceans and bring about waves of change. Because, of course, often when a ripple hits the shore, it will come back, and it's almost perpetual motion in some ways. We quieter ones like to do things in a more understated yet powerful way. So Pebbles in the Pond is about inviting you to pick your pond, pick your pebble. I have two here with me because I will be dropping a pebble at some stage later today, so that our ripples don't get subsumed by the choppy waves. Now, I guess what some of you are thinking, if we go back to some of the imagery we've seen around the show, how does the symbolism of a gentle ripple align with a rebellion? Because it may seem incongruent, right? So let me explain. Rebellions do not have to be riotous affairs. Small acts of rebellion have a huge impact. I imagine, like me, you've heard the African proverb that was quoted by the Dalai Lama. And this African proverb is, if you think you're too small to make a difference, you haven't spent a night with a mosquito. So we don't have to be huge characters. We don't have to do things that are kind of real shock things to make a difference. I've been encouraging delegates on both my corporate training courses and my introverted programs, like Becoming Braver, to be more rebellious and in a positive way. I first kind of got really into this when I came across the work of Lois Kelly and Carmen Medina in their book Rebels at Work, and they've got some really great resources on the difference between good and bad rebels, and that's the terms they use. And I'm advocating to unlock, to unleash, if you like, the good rebels in all of us. So here are the distinctions that Kelly and Medina make about the difference between good and bad rebels. Bad rebels break rules. Good rebels change rules. Bad rebels obsess about problems. Good rebels pursue opportunities. Bad rebels lecture. Good rebels listen. Bad rebels alienate. Good rebels attract. Bad rebels point fingers. Good rebels pinpoint causes. Bad rebels are me focused. Good rebels are mission focused. So when we see rebelliousness in those terms, all of a sudden it takes on a whole different light, and we can see how it might align with the ripples from a pebble dropped in a pond. So today, in this first show, I'm calling forward those prepared to change the prevailing rules of their organizations to get behind this mission of shifting the extraversion bias. Because the intention of this work, this mission, is to leave a legacy not only for people, but more importantly, to leave a legacy in people. So what kind of legacy is my mission about leaving in people? Well, it's leaving hope and inspiration and belief in themselves. It's leaving them knowing their own value and worth. And those two things were actually discussed at this morning's International Women's Day breakfast that I hosted. And there was a wonderful story of a woman who runs her own recruitment agency, and her 14-year-old daughter has her own desk at the agency. She comes in after school and earns her pocket money in that way. And her daughter has already become a good negotiator. When her daughter asked for £7 an hour, her mum offered her £5 an hour. So her daughter said, okay, 8 then. And what she said to her mum is, you've taught me my self-worth, my value. How amazing is that? And that's something that we can do to all of those, for all of those introverts around us who don't yet know their own self-worth. Now, when we kind of explore things like that, and when we're about leaving that legacy, it's also about leaving in people feelings of psychological safety. Because the reality is we can create much of that safety for ourselves rather than waiting or hoping for somebody else to provide it. You know, if I sit back and say, okay, I'm not going to engage until you provide me with psychological safety, honestly, I'm going to be waiting a long time. What I need to do is really understand what I would need in order to feel psychologically safe and set about creating that and asking for that myself. So I suggest that one of our rebellious acts will be to educate and raise awareness. Not very rebellious, you might say, but think back to the good and bad rebels. But what I'm aware of is there are plenty of introverts who would rather complain than risk taking action. Their limiting beliefs kick in as does the voice of their inner critic saying, don't put your head above the parapet, keep your head down, keep out of trouble. Well, frankly, to hell with that. Here are the essence of Kelly and Medina's 9 points that rebels want their boss to understand. And as I'm sharing these with you, I'm also considering myself the boss of my inner rebel, Trixie, because Trixie could become a bad rebel on a bad day. So I still need to manage Trixie. So I'm listening to these 9 points, knowing that what I'm doing is using them to manage my inner critic, my inner rebel, and understand my inner rebel. So the first thing rebels want their organization and their managers and leaders to know is that we're not troublemakers. We're motivated to make our organizations and systems better. And that's what I'm motivated to do. By calling forth this rebellion, I'm motivated to shift the extraversion bias, which makes organizations and systems better. The second thing is that we care. That's why we're willing to have difficult conversations. Another topic that was raised at this morning's breakfast, International Women's Day breakfast, is how many of us are skilled and prepared and confident enough to have those difficult conversations. Well, rebels are. That's why we're prepared to, however scary it feels, have those conversations. Rebels need a psychologically safe environment so that we can challenge the status quo. And as I've just shared, we are largely in control of creating that for ourselves. We want our leaders and managers to love our quirks and our differences. Absolutely. I'm not broken. I don't need fixing. I'm wired differently. I'm not weird. It's actually a good thing that, I'm not like you and you're not like me, because that's diversity, equity, and inclusion in practice. When we value the differences rather than create an echo chamber or surround ourselves with people like us. We want our leaders and managers as rebels to challenge us because we want to be stretched and prove that our slightly off the wall, wacky ideas can work. And let's face it, we're in times where we need different solutions because more of the same is not going to get us out of where we are now. We don't want leaders and managers to pay lip service to us or our ideas. We can take the honesty. Rebels can handle honesty. We want our leaders and managers to coach us, especially in how to navigate organizational politics. There's a topic I was training a group on earlier this week, because let's face it, anyone who works in an organization does politics, with a small p, of course. It's how we do politics that matters. We can either do it with integrity or we can do it as a game player. And for me, there's only one route, and it's with integrity. We want our leaders and managers to know that rebelliousness is a positive behavior that requires and uses courage and risk-taking. We're not cookie cutter people. We don't respond well to being kind of forced into, imagining dough now kind of shoved into a cookie cutter. We don't thrive. We don't flourish in those environments. And we want our leaders and managers to appreciate us, to recognize that we're changing things for the better, that we're changing the rules not for the better, not to be difficult. And the more we do that, the better we'll be able to help your business and your system be. Now, aren't those 9 rules just absolutely glorious? They inspire me. They light me up. You can probably hear some of the passion in my voice. And that's how you can rebel without putting your livelihood at risk, because I know some of the more nervous introverts will think, oh, I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to put, anything at risk. A positive rebel who goes about things in the right way, with a sense of assuredness, with a sense of kind of that purpose, that mission, they may rock the boat, but they certainly won't tip it over. So why does it take a sassy introvert? That was certainly on some of the promo material, is that I'm calling forward those sassy introverts, and I've already mentioned that. And I know that the term has negative connotations, but that's not how I see sassy. Sassy for me is spirited. Sassy for me has something that actually says we know who we are and we know what we stand for. So here's my definition of how I consider sassy. Sassy is when I look society square in the face and say, I understand who you want me to be, but I'm here to show you who I actually am. So, pebble number 1, are you ready? First pebble that I'm dropping in the pond is, we all have the ability to make an impact. We just need to know what impact we want to make. It's not the size of the action or the size of our pebble, come to that matters, but the power of its influence. Small acts of rebellion make a difference, especially when we're not rowdy, argumentative, or kind of taking a pointless point of view. So here's what I invite you to do. I invite you to take action. I invite you to think about, what can you do to empower fellow introverts? How can you inspire them to be good rebels? How can you role model that? How can you amplify their voices? How can you lean out and offer a hand? One of the things I talked about today is that my early career as an engineer in BT, when there were very few female engineers, and when there were even fewer leaders and managers, well, senior managers as women, they tended to close the door behind them. They pulled up the ladder. They didn't help us. And what I'm encouraging here is that we lean out. I'm not going to say down, but lean out and actually offer a hand and take people with us on the journey. What is it you can do to shake loose the bias? And how can we support each other, especially during tough times, which we most certainly are in? I'll be asking for your ideas as to how you're going to do those things, because if all you do is listen and go, yeah, good points, Joe, but don't take action, we won't move this mission forward. And I can't do it on my own. It needs a tribe of us, if you like, to do that. So what's next? Well, I'll be taking a few questions and answers if there are any that's popped in here. But remember, we've also got a private Zoom room for you to join as soon as this show ends, where you can come in live and ask me questions. You don't have to be on camera. You can unmute, or you can put your questions in the chat in the Zoom room. And my team are just popping the Zoom link in the chat now. So wherever you're watching, wherever you're listening, make sure that you do pick up that Zoom link. So that's the first thing that's next. And the next thing that's next is, of course, episode 2 will be in 2 weeks' time. And one of the things I'm hoping to do is garner your thoughts and ideas about what you'd like me to talk about. I will be, in fact, I've got lots of ideas up my sleeve, especially around building on our positive rebelliousness. But I also want to deliver things that work for you. My team are telling me there are lots of comments. So are there any comments or questions, team, that you think I should see and answer right now? Just giving them a moment to see if there's anything they want to pop on the screen for me to answer. Nothing coming up just yet. Okay, I can see that. Santosh, welcome from Asia. Oh, big respect. 1:30 in the morning. That's absolutely. I'm thrilled that you're here, and thank you. Lisa, hi. Thank you for joining me. Lisa says, it's about time us introverts had a voice. Thank you for creating the space to make it happen. Lisa, it's my absolute pleasure. And I know that we share the introversion in common, and I know that we share the love of rebelliousness in common as well. So I think there's a lot that we have there. Brilliant. Okay, in that case, if there are any questions, I know my team can make a note of them and we can take them forward with us into the Zoom room. Oh, we've got more comments coming. Thank you. August, top of the morning. Thank you. Love the shoes analogy. Yeah. Oh, and welcome, Brad. I know that Brad is an introvert, and I'm thrilled that you're here watching this, Brad. So I hope there have been things that have resonated with you. And I have an inkling that your August will encourage your rebelliousness. And educating the essence. Thank you. Love the shoe analogy. Yes, it's really powerful, isn't it? I saw that quite a few years ago. And for me, it absolutely made sense of the kind of differentiation between the things around diversity, equity, inclusion, equality, and frankly, why equality is not enough. Brad says, I prefer the gentle rebellion you speak of. It's not too heavy on, yes, not too heavy on my soul. And neither is it too wearing. So for me, one of the things that I absolutely love about the positive rebelliousness done in a purposeful, intentional, calm and measured way is that I'm more likely to be heard, because frankly, shouting kind of gets through to people in terms of they hear, but they don't necessarily take it on board. A more measured approach really works. A comment from Intentional, I think safe workplace changes how we contribute. Chris, I love you that you're here, Chris. Absolutely, I agree. I agree. And one of the things I know about the workplace that you operate in is that psychological safety, is something that has been created, and you're encouraged to really understand what it takes for you to feel psychologically safe. And there's great kind of focus on creating that psychological safety. Tammy, thank you for joining us here. Thank you. Brad says, I wish people understood that we're exact opposite of cookie cutter. Yes, we are. Yes, we are. And like 20 knives of the chef with all that. Yes, all with their own uses. Yeah, absolutely. I resist heavily being put in, or somebody trying to put me into a box. And some people might say, well, hang on a minute, you're identifying as an introvert. Aren't you putting yourself into a box? Remember that the introvert type quiz that I have, yourintroverttype.co.uk, that'll throw the team, because I didn't ask them to have that link ready to pop on the screen. But that will help you understand what type of introvert you are, so that we know that we're not all the same. Thank you. They've responded. They've popped up my website there, and you will find the quiz on my website. Tammy, talking about equity and inclusion in classes, I'm going to borrow that analogy. Please do. It's not mine. I wish I could remember where it came from, Tammy, but it's one really worth sharing, I think. Someone asked on LinkedIn if recordings will be available. Yes, on all social media platforms, same links. Yes. So one of the benefits of going live as we have through StreamYard is that the recordings will be there, so people can go back and rewatch. And I'd like to think people would go back and rewatch, because I hope there's been plenty of gold here, plenty of nuggets, plenty of goodness. Okay, we'll be opening the Zoom room right after this broadcast within 1 minute. So remember, take action. Don't just be passive around this. And I will be asking you for what it is you'd like me to talk about in the future. So I invite you to join we sassy positive rebels, so we make shift happen. Thank you.